Picture this. You're sitting in a boardroom watching your most talented employee collapse right in front of investors. The paramedics are called. Everyone's staring at you. And in that moment, you realize you're not just a manager. You're the reason she's on that stretcher. My name is Marcus Chen, and this is the story of how I nearly destroyed someone's life in the name of success, and what it taught me about the toxic culture we've normalized in American workplaces. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Seattle tech office as I reviewed the quarterly reports. March 2024 had been brutal. We were behind on 3 major client deliverables, and our biggest competitor had just launched a product that was stealing market share. The coffee in my mug had gone cold hours ago, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing through solutions, strategies, anything that could pull us back from the edge. Sarah Williams knocked on my office door at exactly 9:47 p.m. I remember the time because I was obsessively checking my watch, calculating how many hours we had left before the Anderson Industries presentation. She stood in the doorway, her usually perfect blonde hair slightly disheveled, her blazer wrinkled from what I assumed was another long day at her desk. "Marcus, we need to talk about the timeline," she said, her voice carrying that professional tone she always maintained, even when I could see the exhaustion in her green eyes. I gestured to the chair across from my desk without looking up from my laptop screen. "The Anderson presentation is in 18 hours, Sarah. Whatever concerns you have, we'll address them after we land this account." She sat down, her movements careful and measured. Sarah had been with Technovision Solutions for 3 years, working her way up from junior developer to senior project manager. She was brilliant, the kind of employee who could see solutions where others saw problems, who could navigate complex client relationships with ease. She was also the kind of employee I'd grown to rely on completely. "The team is running on fumes," she said quietly. "Jenny hasn't been home before midnight in 2 weeks. Tom's been making calculation errors, basic ones he'd never make if he wasn't so tired. And the quality assurance testing we promised Anderson? We've cut it from 2 weeks to 3 days. I finally looked up from my screen, meeting her gaze. The fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows under her eyes, making the dark circles more pronounced. For a split second, something in my chest tightened, a recognition of her exhaustion that I immediately pushed aside. "Sarah, I appreciate your concern for the team, but we're in survival mode here. Anderson Industries represents 40% of our projected revenue for Q2. If we don't close this deal, we're looking at layoffs, potentially significant ones." She leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I understand the stakes, Marcus, but pushing everyone beyond their limits isn't sustainable. We're going to burn out, and when we do, we won't be able to deliver quality work for any client." The irony wasn't lost on me, even then. Here I was, talking about sustainability while asking my team to work unsustainable hours. But the pressure from above was immense. Our CEO, David Reeves, had made it clear that this quarter would determine which departments survived the upcoming restructure. My team, my job, my own ambitious plans for advancement. It all hinged on numbers, deadlines, and results. "Look," I said, trying to soften my tone without compromising my message, "I know it's tough, but this is temporary. After Anderson, we'll have breathing room. Maybe we'll even hire additional staff, but right now I need everyone to dig deep and find that extra gear." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on something beyond my shoulder. The Seattle skyline stretched out behind me, office buildings dotted with lights from other companies, where other employees were probably having similar conversations with their managers. "What about the employee wellness survey results that came back last week?" she asked finally. I had to think for a moment to remember what she was referring to. HR had distributed some kind of workplace satisfaction questionnaire, but I'd been too focused on client deliverables to pay much attention to the results. "What about them?" 87% of our department reported feeling overwhelmed. 63% said they were considering looking for other opportunities, and 41% said they felt their mental health was being negatively impacted by work stress. The numbers hung in the air between us. I could feel a defensive response building in my chest, the same reaction I had whenever someone questioned my management style or the team's productivity standards. Those surveys are anonymous and subjective, I said. And frankly, every company deals with stress during busy periods. What matters is results. Our team consistently outperforms other departments. Our client retention rate is 94%. We're profitable when other divisions are struggling. Sarah stood up slowly, smoothing down her skirt with hands that I now realize were trembling slightly. You're right about the results, Marcus. We do deliver, but at what cost? She walked toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. I'll get the Anderson presentation finished tonight. The team will be ready tomorrow, but after that, we really need to have a conversation about sustainable practices. After she left, I sat in my office for another 2 hours, ostensibly working on strategy documents but really thinking about her question. At what cost? I thought about my own career trajectory, the 70-hour weeks, the missed family dinners, the relationships that had ended because I was always too busy. I thought about the stomach problems that had started 6 months ago, the way I'd been grinding my teeth at night, the prescription sleep aids my doctor had recommended. But then I looked at the awards on my wall, the commendations from senior leadership, the salary increases and bonuses. I thought about the house I'd been able to buy in Queen Anne, the car, the vacations to places my parents had never been able to afford. Success required sacrifice. That was the American way, wasn't it? The next morning, I arrived at the office at 6:30 a.m. to find Sarah already at her desk, looking like she hadn't slept at all. Her usually immaculate presentation materials were spread across her workspace, and she was making last-minute adjustments to the PowerPoint slides. The Anderson Industries logo glowed on her monitor screen, surrounded by charts and graphs that represented months of work. "Morning," I said, setting a coffee cup on her desk. "Thought you might need this." She looked up at me with a grateful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks. I think we're ready. The demo is loaded, all the technical specifications are verified, and I've prepared answers for the 20 most likely questions they'll ask." I studied her face more carefully than I had in weeks. The dark circles under her eyes were more pronounced, and there was a slight tremor in her hands as she reached for the coffee cup. Her skin had a grayish pallor that I attributed to the poor office lighting. "You look tired," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were inadequate. "I'm fine," she replied quickly. "Just want to make sure everything goes smoothly today." The Anderson Industries team arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, 5 executives in expensive suits led by their Chief Technology Officer, Rebecca Martinez, a woman with a reputation for asking tough questions and expecting detailed answers. They settled into our main conference room, and I began the presentation with my usual opening about Technovision's commitment to innovation and client success. Sarah took over for the technical portion, her voice steady and professional despite her obvious fatigue. She walked them through our proposed solution, with the kind of detailed knowledge that only comes from complete immersion in a project. She anticipated their questions, addressed their concerns, and demonstrated our software capabilities with the expertise that had made her so valuable to our team. But I noticed small things that the clients probably missed. The way she gripped the edge of the conference table when she stood up, the slight delay before she answered questions that should have been automatic for her, the way she kept blinking, as if trying to clear her vision. 20 minutes into her presentation, Sarah was explaining the data security protocols when she suddenly stopped mid-sentence. She stood there, staring at the projected slides, her mouth slightly open as if the words had simply vanished. "Sarah?" I prompted gently. She blinked hard, shook her head slightly, and continued as if nothing had happened. But I saw Rebecca Martinez exchange a glance with one of her colleagues, and I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The presentation continued for another hour. Sarah managed to recover her composure and finish strong, but I could see the effort it was costing her. By the time we were shaking hands and walking the Anderson team to the elevator, she was visibly struggling to maintain her professional demeanor. "We'll be in touch within the week," Rebecca Martinez told me as the elevator doors closed. Her tone was polite but non-committal, and I knew we were in trouble. I turned back to find Sarah slumped against the wall near the reception area, her face pale and her breathing shallow. "Sarah, are you okay?" She pushed herself off the wall and attempted to smile. "Just need some fresh air. I think I'll take a short break." But as she walked toward the exit, her steps were unsteady, and I realized with growing alarm that something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just tiredness. This was something more. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday in late March. I remember the exact time because I was staring at my phone in the darkness of my bedroom, wondering who would be calling at such an hour. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer. "Is this Marcus Chen?" The voice was professional, clinical. "Yes, this is Marcus. This is Dr. Patricia Hendricks from Seattle General Hospital. We have Sarah Williams here, and you're listed as her emergency contact for work-related matters. She's stable, but she was brought in earlier tonight." My heart stopped. "What happened? Is she okay?" "She collapsed at home. Her neighbor called 911 when she didn't respond to knocking. She's conscious now, but we're keeping her overnight for observation. She's been asking for you to call her team members to let them know she won't be in tomorrow." Even in a hospital bed, Sarah was worried about work. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I drove to the hospital through empty Seattle streets, the city looking strange and unfamiliar in the pre-dawn darkness. The emergency room was quiet, with only the soft beeping of machines and the occasional murmur of medical staff moving between patients. Sarah looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, connected to an IV and a heart monitor. Her face was pale against the white pillows, and her usually perfect hair was matted against her head. She was awake, staring at the ceiling when I walked into her room. "Marcus," she said weakly, attempting to sit up. "I'm so sorry about this. I know we have the Morrison Project review tomorrow, and the client presentation for—" "Stop," I said more firmly than I intended. "Don't apologize, don't think about work, just focus on getting better." She looked at me with surprise, as if she couldn't quite process what I was saying. "But the deadlines can wait." "Doctor." Hendricks found me in the hallway an hour later. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the kind of direct manner that comes from years of delivering difficult news to families. "Mr. Chen, I need to ask you some questions about Ms. Williams's work environment." I felt defensive immediately. "Is there a problem?" "She's suffering from severe exhaustion and dehydration. Her blood pressure is elevated and she's showing signs of chronic stress." When we asked about her lifestyle, she mentioned working between 70 and 80 hours per week for the past several months. The numbers hit me like accusations. 70 to 80 hours. I'd known the team was working long days, but somehow I'd managed not to calculate exactly what that meant in terms of human cost. She also mentioned that she's been having trouble sleeping, frequent headaches, and hasn't been eating regular meals. Dr. Hendricks continued. "These are classic symptoms of burnout, Mr. Chen. Left unchecked, this can lead to serious long-term health consequences." I stood in that sterile hospital hallway, surrounded by the sounds and smells of medical crisis, and felt something shift inside me. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or client deliverables or my own career advancement. I was thinking about Sarah, lying in that hospital bed, apologizing for being human. "What can we do?" I asked. "She needs rest. Real rest, not just a long weekend, but weeks to recover properly. And when she does return to work, her schedule needs to be sustainable. The human body isn't designed to operate under constant stress." I spent the rest of that night in the hospital waiting room, drinking terrible coffee, and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. I thought about the employee wellness survey results that Sarah had mentioned. I thought about the other members of my team, Jenny, who hadn't been home before midnight in weeks, Tom, who was making errors he'd never made before, the rest of the staff who'd been quietly absorbing impossible workloads without complaint. When had I stopped seeing them as people and started seeing them as resources to be optimized? My phone buzzed with messages throughout the night. Jenny, asking if everything was okay. Tom, offering to take over Sarah's assignments. Other team members expressing concern and asking how they could help. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here were people who were already overworked, volunteering to take on even more because they cared about their colleague. The next morning, I called an emergency team meeting. I looked around the conference room at faces that I suddenly saw clearly for the first time in months. Everyone looked tired. Not just end of a long day tired, but bone-deep chronic exhaustion tired. How had I missed this? "Sarah is in the hospital," I began, and watched as the concern rippled around the room. "She collapsed from exhaustion last night. The doctor says she's going to be okay, but she needs time to recover." Jenny, our lead developer, spoke first. "How long will she be out? Should we redistribute her projects?" The question was practical, necessary, but it highlighted exactly the problem I was beginning to understand. We'd created a culture where someone's health crisis immediately became a logistics problem to be solved. "We're going to redistribute her workload," I said, "but not the way we usually do. We're going to scale back our commitments. We're going to extend some deadlines. We're going to say no to some requests." The silence in the room was profound. In 3 years of working together, I'd never suggested turning down work or missing deadlines. Tom, our senior analyst, cleared his throat. "Marcus, the Morrison review is tomorrow. The client is flying in from Portland specifically for that meeting. Then we'll give them the best presentation we can with the time we have," I said, "but we're not going to kill ourselves to make it perfect." Over the next few days, I started making changes that I should have made months earlier. I pushed back on unrealistic deadlines. I hired temporary contractors to help with overflow work. I started paying attention to when people were leaving the office and actually encouraged them to go home at reasonable hours. But the biggest change was in how I saw my role as a manager. I'd been thinking of myself as a performance optimizer, focused on extracting maximum productivity from my team. I'd measured success in billable hours and completed projects, not in employee satisfaction or sustainable work practices. Sarah returned to the office 3 weeks later, after what Dr. Hendricks had insisted was complete rest. She looked better. Her color had returned and the dark circles under her eyes had faded. But there was also something different in her demeanor, a wariness that hadn't been there before. "How are you feeling?" I asked when she stopped by my office on her first day back. "Better," she said, though her voice was carefully neutral. "Thank you for handling everything while I was out." "Sarah, I need to apologize to you. For pushing too hard, for not recognizing the signs that you were struggling, for creating an environment where you felt like you couldn't say no to unreasonable demands." She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if trying to determine whether my words were genuine. "I appreciate that," she said finally. "But Marcus, this isn't just about one apology or one conversation. The entire culture here needs to change. And honestly, I'm not sure it can. Not without buy-in from the top." She was right, and we both knew it. Individual managers could make incremental improvements, but real change required systemic transformation. And that meant confronting not just my own management style, but the broader company culture that had rewarded and reinforced toxic work practices. The meeting with David Reeves, our CEO, was scheduled for the following Monday. I'd spent the weekend preparing what I thought would be a straightforward conversation about adjusting our department's productivity expectations. I had data, employee satisfaction scores, turnover projections, the cost of Sarah's hospitalization and temporary replacement. I had solutions, hiring additional staff, implementing flexible work arrangements, establishing boundaries around after-hours communication. What I wasn't prepared for was David's reaction. "Marcus, I'm concerned about what I'm hearing," he said, leaning back in his leather chair with his hands steepled in front of him. "The Anderson Industries deal fell through. The Morrison Project Review received lukewarm feedback. And now you're telling me you want to reduce our team's productivity standards." I felt my carefully prepared arguments crumble under the weight of his disapproval. This was the man who'd promoted me twice in 4 years, who'd championed my career advancement, who'd made it clear that my future at Technovision depended on continued exceptional performance. David, one of my employees, was hospitalized from exhaustion. That's not acceptable regardless of our productivity metrics. "Sarah Williams is a valuable employee," he acknowledged, But she's also one person. We can't restructure our entire approach based on one incident. One incident. The phrase hung in the air between us, and I realized that David saw Sarah's collapse the same way I'd initially seen her concerns, as an isolated problem to be managed, not as a symptom of something larger and more troubling. "It's not one incident," I said, finding my voice stronger than I'd expected. "Our employee satisfaction scores are terrible. Our turnover rate is climbing. We're burning through talented people because we're treating them like machines instead of human beings." David's expression hardened. "Marcus, let me remind you that we're running a business, not a wellness retreat. Our clients expect results, our shareholders expect profits, and frankly, our employees expect paychecks. All of that requires a certain level of commitment and performance." I left that meeting understanding that changing our workplace culture would require more than good intentions and incremental adjustments. It would require fundamental shifts in how we define success, measured performance, and valued our employees' humanity. But I also left with a new determination. If I couldn't change the entire company culture immediately, I could at least transform how my department operated. I could create a pocket of sanity in what I was beginning to recognize as a fundamentally toxic environment. The first step was honest conversations with each member of my team. Not performance reviews or project check-ins, but real discussions about their experiences, their concerns, and their ideas for improvement.
I agree, but
what I learned was both illuminating and
funds?
heartbreaking. Jenny, who I'd always seen as our most dedicated developer, told me about the panic attacks she'd been having in the office bathroom. She'd been too afraid to mention them because she thought it would reflect poorly on her commitment to the job. Tom revealed that his wife had been urging him to look for other opportunities because she rarely saw him anymore. He'd been considering it, but felt guilty about leaving the team during such a busy period. Maria, our project coordinator, had been silently managing symptoms of depression that had worsened significantly during our most intense project cycles. She'd been afraid to seek help because she didn't want to appear unable to handle the workload. Each conversation was a revelation about the human cost of our pursuit of professional success. These weren't just employees with productivity metrics. They were people with families, health concerns, personal dreams, and limits that I'd been systematically ignoring. But the most difficult conversation was with Sarah. 3 weeks after her return, she asked to speak with me privately. We met after hours in the conference room, where she'd given the Anderson presentation, a choice that I now realize was deliberately symbolic. "Marcus, I've been thinking a lot about my future here," she began, and my heart sank because I recognized the tone. I'd heard it from other talented employees just before they submitted their resignation letters. "I appreciate the changes you've been trying to make," she continued. "The reduced overtime expectations, the pushback on unrealistic deadlines, the focus on sustainable practices. But I need to know that these changes are permanent, not just temporary adjustments until the next crisis hits." I wanted to reassure her, to promise that everything would be different going forward. But I'd learned enough about honesty in the past few weeks to recognize that such promises might be beyond my ability to keep. "I can't control everything that happens at the company level," I said. "But I can commit to continuing to advocate for our team's well-being, even when it's difficult or unpopular." She nodded slowly. "I need to tell you something that I probably should have said a long time ago. When I was in the hospital, I wasn't just thinking about work because I'm dedicated or obsessive. I was thinking about work because I was terrified of being replaced, of being seen as unreliable, of losing my job for being human." The weight of her words settled over me like a physical presence. I'd created an environment where my most talented employee was afraid to be sick, afraid to have limits, afraid to prioritize her health over her productivity. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry that you felt that way, and I'm sorry that my management style contributed to that fear." "I know you are," she said, "and I believe that you want things to be different. But wanting change and implementing it are different things, especially when the broader company culture remains the same." She was right, of course. Individual transformation, while necessary, wasn't sufficient to address systemic problems. but it was a starting point. Over the following weeks, I began implementing changes that went beyond surface-level adjustments. I instituted mandatory lunch breaks and actually enforced them. I created clear boundaries around after-hours communication, establishing that emails sent after 6 p.m. were not expected to be answered until the next business day. I started measuring team success not just in terms of completed projects and billable hours, but also in terms of employee satisfaction and work-life balance metrics. The pushback from senior leadership was immediate and intense. David Reeves called me into his office twice to express concerns about our department's declining commitment and softening standards. Other department heads made snide comments about our reduced productivity and questioned whether we were still pulling our weight. But something interesting happened. Our actual productivity didn't decline significantly. In fact, in some areas, it improved. When people weren't exhausted, they made fewer errors. When they felt supported and valued, they took more initiative and showed greater creativity in problem-solving. When they had sustainable workloads, they could focus more effectively during the hours they were working. More importantly, our team dynamics transformed. People started collaborating more effectively because they weren't competing for resources or recognition in a zero-sum environment. They began sharing concerns and ideas more openly because they no longer feared that honesty would be interpreted as weakness or disloyalty. The changes weren't without challenges. Some clients had to adjust their expectations about response times and turnaround schedules. Some projects took longer to complete because we prioritized quality over speed, and some colleagues in other departments viewed our approach with skepticism or resentment. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was managing human beings instead of productivity units. I was learning to see success in terms of sustainable performance, employee development, and long-term well-being, rather than short-term metrics and quarterly reports. 6 months after Sarah's hospitalization, I received an email that changed everything. It was from Rebecca Martinez, the CTO of Anderson Industries, the client we'd lost after Sarah's problematic presentation. "Marcus," the email read, "I've been hearing interesting things about the changes at Technovision. Several contacts in the industry have mentioned your team's reputation for sustainable practices and employee well-being. We're looking for a technology partner for a long-term project, and we'd like to schedule a conversation about your capabilities." I stared at the email for several minutes, trying to process the irony. The client we'd lost because of our toxic work culture was now interested in working with us because of our reputation for sustainable practices. The conversation with Rebecca Martinez took place 3 weeks later, but it was unlike any client meeting I'd ever experienced. Instead of focusing solely on technical capabilities and competitive pricing, she asked detailed questions about our team's work-life balance, our employee retention rates, and our approach to project management. "I've seen too many partnerships fail because the vendor team was burned out, overextended, or constantly losing key personnel," she explained. "We're looking for a sustainable partnership, not just a quick project completion." We landed the Anderson Industries contract, a 3-year engagement worth significantly more than the original deal we'd lost. But more importantly, we landed it because of our commitment to treating our employees as human beings rather than despite it. That success story spread through our industry network, leading to inquiries from other potential clients who were similarly interested in working with companies that prioritized sustainability and employee well-being. I began to realize that our approach wasn't just ethically superior, it was also becoming a competitive advantage in an industry that was increasingly recognizing the cost of employee burnout. But the real transformation wasn't in our client relationships or revenue numbers. It was in the daily experience of working at Technovision Solutions. Sarah, who I'd feared might leave the company, became one of our strongest advocates for the cultural changes we'd implemented. She began leading workshops on sustainable project management and work-life balance for other teams within the company. Jenny's panic attacks became a thing of the past as she learned to set boundaries and communicate her needs more effectively. Tom's marriage strengthened as he rediscovered the importance of being present for his family. Maria sought treatment for her depression and became an advocate for mental health awareness in the workplace. The changes rippled beyond my immediate team. Other department managers began asking questions about our practices and requesting guidance on implementing similar approaches. HR started using our team as a model for employee engagement initiatives. Even David Reeves, initially skeptical of our soft approach, began acknowledging the positive results we were achieving. But perhaps the most significant change was in my own understanding of leadership. I'd spent years thinking that being a good manager meant extracting maximum performance from my team, measuring success in terms of productivity metrics and quarterly results. I'd believed that pushing people to their limits was necessary for competitive success. What I learned was that sustainable high performance requires a completely different approach. It means seeing employees as whole human beings with complex lives, personal challenges, and individual limits. It means creating environments where people feel safe to communicate their needs, concerns, and ideas without fear of retribution or judgment. It means measuring success not just in terms of short-term deliverables, but also in terms of long-term team health and employee development. Most importantly, I learned that true leadership isn't about controlling or optimizing human resources. It's about creating conditions where people can do their best work while maintaining their health, relationships, and personal well-being. The conversation with Sarah that had started this entire transformation took place almost a year to the day after her hospitalization. We were sitting in the same conference room, but the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of the tense, crisis-driven meetings of the past, this was a relaxed discussion about our team's future goals and development opportunities. "Marcus," she said, "I want you to know how much these changes have meant to me, both personally and professionally. For the first time in my career, I feel like I can be successful without sacrificing my health or my relationships." "I should have listened to you sooner," I replied. "I should have seen the signs, recognized the unsustainability of what we were doing, and made changes before it reached a crisis point." "Maybe," she said thoughtfully. "But sometimes we need to hit bottom before we're ready to make fundamental changes. The important thing is that you were willing to learn and adapt." She was right, of course. Change rarely happens without some kind of catalyst, a moment of clarity that forces us to confront the gap between our intentions and our actions, between our stated values and our actual practices. As I write this story now, 2 years after Sarah's hospitalization, our team has become known throughout Technovision Solutions as a model for sustainable high performance. We've maintained our reputation for technical excellence while dramatically improving our employee satisfaction scores, reducing turnover, and creating an environment where people genuinely enjoy coming to work. The broader company culture is still evolving, but the changes we've implemented have created a ripple effect that extends far beyond my immediate sphere of influence. Other managers have adopted similar practices. HR has revised company policies to better support work-life balance. Even David Reeves has begun incorporating employee well-being metrics into his assessment of departmental performance. But the most important change isn't visible in any organizational chart or policy manual. It's in the daily interactions between managers and employees, in the recognition that productivity and humanity aren't competing values but complementary ones, in the understanding that sustainable success requires treating people as whole human beings, rather than resources to be optimized. I ignored Sarah's pain until I was forced to see it, and that moment of forced recognition changed everything, not just for her, but for our entire team, our department, and ultimately our company culture. It taught me that the greatest leadership challenge isn't managing productivity or achieving quarterly targets. It's creating environments where people can thrive both professionally and personally. The truth about workplace culture is that it's not something that happens to us. It's something we create, day by day, through the choices we make about how we treat each other, how we define success, and what we're willing to sacrifice in pursuit of our professional goals. We have the power to change it, but only if we're willing to see clearly, act courageously, and prioritize human well-being alongside business results. If this story resonated with you, if you've experienced similar workplace challenges Or if you're a manager who wants to create a more sustainable and humane work environment, I want to hear from you. Share your own experiences in the comments below. Subscribe to this channel for more stories about leadership, workplace culture, and the human side of business success. Together, we can transform workplace culture, one team, one manager, and one human interaction at a time. Your story matters, and your voice can be part of the change we need to see in the working world.